Hello and welcome to the Overland Journal podcast. I'm your host, Scott Brady, and I'm joined today by Robert and Clary of Double Dutch World Safari. Over the last 20 years on the road, they have visited 144 countries around the world. And they've used a couple different kinds of expedition vehicles, from a smaller Fuso base to the much larger one they're using today. We'll learn about how they travel. We'll learn about how they live on the road. They've got some great stories as well. So please enjoy my conversation with Robert and Clary. And as they say, remember, you never know until you never go. I also wanted to take a brief moment to thank all of you for listening to the Overland Journal podcast. By listening to this podcast and subscribing to the Overland Journal magazine, you're supporting our employee-owned and veteran-owned business. Impartial reviews and in-depth content like this would not be possible without your support. If you enjoy the podcast, I think you'd really love the print magazine as well. And 100% of that subscription price goes back into creating the content like you're listening to right now. And as a special thank you for your loyalty, we're giving 20% off any subscription. And that even includes our special lifetime subscription, which includes numerous lifetime-only benefits. You can go to overlandjournal.com and use the code OverlandPodcast at checkout. Again, that's code OverlandPodcast at checkout, and that'll give you 20% off. I sincerely appreciate your support. Robert, thank you so much for being on the podcast with me today. Now, you are from Double Dutch Down Under, is kind of your call sign, but you have not only been down under, you have been around and over and through most of the world. So I'm really honored to have you on the podcast today and to learn from your many decades of travels around the world. You and your wife have been an inspiration to so many. You have spent so much time at the Overland Expos talking about your journeys and inspiring future generations to have their own exploration around the world. You know, Robert, the first question I want to ask for you is, what inspired you to get started?
Well, probably my mom and dad and my wife's parents. They've been camping as long as I remember. I think I was 3 years old when we went camping in Italy and Germany and Austria.
Sure.
From there, of course, we took over, got married. We started camping and traveling around Europe. We migrated to Australia in 1980.
Okay, so a long time ago.
Yeah. We've been there 40 years or 41 years. So, and of course...
Don't remind me. You start to think about the dates. It's like the 80s didn't seem that long ago.
It isn't.
Yeah, that's so funny.
So, yeah, actually then, of course, we realized they got this huge outback, and Australia, of course, is perfect for camping. And we decided to start traveling, initially in a two-wheel drive.
Yeah.
That became a four-wheel drive. The salesman, I'll never forget, told me this car will go anywhere. Clary now and then our first trip, and we got right on top of two ruts, which allowed me to walk underneath the car, and I had no idea what to do.
Sure.
So it was time to join the four-wheel drive club.
Yeah, and I had a similar story. I ended up getting sold a two-wheel drive by a salesman. He says, look, it's got big tires on it, it'll be fine. And of course, I got stuck very quickly. One question I have always been curious of, I have my own ideas, but the Dutch are prolific travelers. I mean, I have run into, and it's not the Netherlands isn't a big country. So, you know, why do you think that the Dutch are so prolific as travelers?
I think it's in their blood. They've been wheeling and dealing all around the world from
That's true.
100 years ago. I mean, they traveled around the world. I think it has just been in our blood. And I mean, and being such a small country, of course.
Yeah.
It is easy to move. In 8 hours' time, you can drive to Italy. And you can cover 3 or 4 different countries. I think that's what it is. But
that makes a lot of sense. And you're right. The Dutch, they managed so many ports around the world.
Exactly.
They really did.
Yeah.
I think they had the only port that interfaced with Japan for the longest time.
Well, I do know that Rotterdam is one of the biggest ports in the world. And I do know that. I mean, the ships coming and going. And that, of course, they supply the rest of Europe.
Yeah, seafaring country, for
yes,
sure.
Absolutely.
And if I'm not mistaken, is that where the ferry leaves to go to like the Faroe Islands and Iceland. Is that where that leaves?
No, but that ferry goes from Denmark.
Denmark, okay.
And towards Hoven, I think is the name, and then it goes to Faroe Islands, Iceland, and the way back. By the way, the Faroe Islands is something we did for a week. It's an amazing group of little islands.
And when you decided to do the Faroes, as I understand it, a lot of people will do it for a whole week, because if you get off the ferry, you got to wait a week for the next one. Isn't that right?
Exact. Yeah, true.
Interesting.
And we actually did Iceland in the winter, and we caught something like 180 km/h winds while we're going across.
That'd be exciting.
We had to tie ourselves up to lay down in our beds, and Clary got quite sick on the way, and of course people got hurt. And just before we arrived at Iceland, helicopters had to take people from the ship. It was bad. Yeah.
Wow.
It was an experience and a half.
So you've had some maritime adventures as well.
I was very worried about my truck sitting underneath there. I thought, is this going to stay in the same spot? But it did, but it was well and truly chained up. Yeah.
When before you moved to Australia in the 1980s, tell me a little bit about your youth. What did you do when you were young? Where did you go to school? What was your discipline?
I was a terrible person at school.
Me too.
The teacher loved me so much that many times I could go home early. And all of a sudden it was the end of it. And my father got told, look, pick him up and don't bring him back.
I got you.
So I finished up working in retail. And from the retail, I actually started into the hospitality industry, DJ, barman.
Cool.
Then I went into the Marines, and from the Marines I finished up in the Caribbean, and I did my training with the American Marines in Fort Lauderdale, and we did Viegas just south of Puerto Rico, and I think that's where I started thinking, hey, there are better places than the Netherlands. Let's go somewhere else. We did our jungle training, things like that.
Wow.
So when I came back out of the Marines, I finished up in hospitality again, and then we ran our own bar and nightclub, and basically in 1980 we left.
You sold the business?
Well, it was more like a leasing type arrangement. Keep in mind I was 20 years old, 22 years old, so I didn't have the money. But then I came to Australia, of course, couldn't speak a word of English. And I mean, being
that
a
takes
DJ...
that takes a lot of courage to do that.
Yeah, well, it was. I mean, you didn't think... Well, I mean... The thing was, of course, when I was in the Marines and when we were training with the Americans, I always had somebody there who did all the translations.
Sure.
And when we watched TV in Holland, there was always subtitles. It was only when we arrived in Australia that all of a sudden, my first day at the airport, I put the suitcase in front of me and the guy said, open your suitcase. And I had no idea what the suitcase was. I said, I've got no suitcase. And then my wife said, open this thing right in front of you. But the guy got annoyed with me due to the fact he thought I was joking.
Sure. Well, first of all, thank you for your service. Thanks for being a Marine and the service that you've done. We've had many veterans on the podcast. So you make it into Australia. And what did you do when you got there? Did you just try to find a job?
Well, it was very funny. But of course, we just sold our business or the lease. So we had a few dollars. So the first week, we stayed in a hotel. But I was looking for a job from day one. And of course, the minute I went into the first pizza parlor I could find, and they offered me a job as a dishie.
Okay.
Washing dishes, I think. And then the guy asked me, what's your address? And when I told him I was staying in a hotel at $160 a night, he looked at me and that was the end of it. So, but that was my weekly salary for one night.
Sure.
So it took a little while to get my feet on the ground, but we finished up with, I used to, in the beginning, I had 2 or 3 jobs. Clary, my wife, had 2 or 3 jobs. We worked, we saved a deposit. We were on a working holiday permit, but we cheated a little bit and we overstayed, and then we got an extension, and then we were told that we had to leave the following year. And I went and saw a solicitor, and he borrowed me money via a finance company. And at the time they wanted to send me away, I asked him who's going to pay the mortgage. And they said, what mortgage? I said, well, I just bought a house. He said, you're not allowed to stay here. Anyway, cut a long story short, I had to see the immigration officer, and I said, mate, look, I'm working, my wife is working. If I want to be on the dole, I go back to Holland. See, the fact I came to Australia to work. And he pointed behind me and said, look, all those people behind you, none of them are working. They cost us a lot of money. Anyway, he must have accepted it, but 3 weeks later I got my permit.
Oh, wow.
And we, of course, we love it ever since. I mean, it was a holiday, it became a holiday, and it is still a holiday.
Yeah. And what was it about Australia that inspired you to go there, of all the places in the world?
I think the only thing I can think of is my time in the Marines, my time in the Caribbean, beautiful weather, sunshine, and of course that's what Australia is all about.
Sure.
And of course we heard about the outback, and all the exploring you can do, the days and weeks and months you can travel without seeing people if you don't want to.
Yeah. You'd had enough gray skies and cloudy days and rain.
Around about 320 a year.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, that's right. Exactly. Oh, cool. So when you spent some time in Australia, you bought a two-wheel drive. What was the first four-wheel drive that you bought?
Was it a Nissan Patrol?
Oh, it's a good choice.
A short wheelbase.
It's probably still running somewhere.
I'm sure it is. And I mean, we did it up, of course. Well, initially, as I explained before, we got stuck well and truly due to the fact the salesman told me this car can do anything.
Yeah.
And I learned very quickly that wasn't the case.
Yeah.
And after that, we then joined the four-wheel drive club. We did a lot of four-wheel driving, steep hills, hard four-wheel driving where the wheels go forward and the car goes backwards.
Yeah, sure.
And then I realized after a couple of years we're going to upgrade a little bit. And of course it had to do with money. We were making a little bit more money, so we could afford a bigger car. And that became the Land Cruiser 60 series.
Good choice.
Upgraded to the 80 series, upgraded to the 100 series. And just lately, only last year, I bought the new 300 series.
So now that you've had Nissan Patrols and just about every version of a Land Cruiser, which one was your favorite?
Definitely the Land Cruiser.
Which one?
Well, I think the 300 series I haven't really put to the test yet. In fact, it's a new model, but the 100 series was amazing.
Isn't that amazing?
It's an amazing.
And you had the 100, not the 105.
Yeah.
Did you have the solid axle in the front, or was it independent?
Yeah, but the 105, I don't think that is available in Australia. We only have the 100 series.
Oh, only the independent.
Yeah.
Got it. Or maybe the 105 is only small numbers or something.
I'm not sure about the what they use here in the US.
Sure. We only got the 100. So we only had the one with the independent front suspension on it.
Well, in between you also had the 200 series, of course.
We did.
But that was while I was traveling. And of course, we never actually purchased the 200 series.
So now, when you started, what made you decide that we've seen a lot of Australia, we've really enjoyed ourselves. Now we want to go see the rest of the world. What was the impetus for that? What kicked you off to do that?
Well, basically, in my time as a member of the Toyota Land Cruiser Club, I became their tour guide. That's volunteer work.
Okay.
And we traveled all around Australia for many years.
Oh, cool.
And then all of a sudden, when we in that time we had our own business, and we decided to go around Australia on a 4-year trip, covering all the areas we normally did in a short holiday or in a weekend trip, etc. And one night we were sitting next to the campfire, the two of us, we traveled on our own. And we just looked at each other and said, look, we've done Australia now for the last 20 years. We've just done 4 years around Australia. Why don't we just go overseas? And Clary said to me, I'd love to.
Oh,
of
there
course.
You go.
And we were a bit inspired also. Ron Moon, from
sure.
4x4 is a good friend of ours.
Yeah, Ron's great.
We were going to join him, but it didn't work out with our new business. So basically, we after we made a decision around the campfire, we'd gone in 8 months. But, in Australia we say, don't become a gunner. If you want to become a gunner, you have to and join the army.
Yeah, that's right.
But otherwise you become gonna do this, gonna do that, gonna do this, and 20 years later you're still gonna do it, but you never did. So we said, let's go. And we did. And we started in Africa.
And what vehicle did you prepare for that first trip?
A Mitsubishi Fuso.
Fuso, good choice.
4x4.
So the FG 4x4,
Yeah, we bought a cab chassis and we actually designed our own unit on the top based on our off-road caravan due to the fact we knew that worked.
Yeah, sure. So you had a similar layout to your caravan.
Absolutely, yeah.
Nice.
Yeah.
And then did you, on that particular vehicle, that would have been early enough that it still had the transfer case with the low range, and it could use just about any diesel in the world, right?
Yes, yeah. It was a simple engine, and it had four-wheel drive. It was just a very good, capable vehicle.
I think so. I've always been so impressed by them. I had the opportunity years ago to use an earth cruiser in Australia, and I drove it around, and I took it on the ferry out to Fraser Island, and that's quite an experience, that ferry, because they kind of back up to the sand and off you go.
In Skip Point.
That's right. That's right. They kind of throws you right into it. But I was so impressed by that vehicle, its capability, and then the fact that you had the house on the back of it. It was very comfortable as well.
Yeah, I mean, that's exactly what we realized when we drove the car. And of course, Earth Cruiser, we also looked at that unit. Kim Bolton at the time,
That's
and
right.
Lance, they
That's
were
right.
both running Earth Cruiser Australia at the time.
That's right.
And but it was just that I had we had a slight different idea about how we wanted to have our layout. And that's when we decided to go to the guy who built my off-road caravan. I got him to build my unit on the back.
Now, did you have it where it was a lifting roof, or was it all solid?
Initially, it was a lifting roof, but after a while, and after 2 years in Africa, that roof, we had some issues with it.
Sure.
And when I arrived in Europe, and then also realized, of course, we also have to cope with cold weather.
Sure.
We actually made it a solid roof while we were in Europe.
Oh, that's clever. So you just converted it.
Yeah.
You put in solid panels and
Yeah.
windows and
Yeah.
everything else.
Yeah.
Oh, that's smart. Then you didn't have to buy an all-new camper.
No.
So when you shipped from Australia, where did you ship into?
Initially, we shipped to South Africa, Durban.
Yeah, sure.
And while we were waiting for the boat to arrive, we actually rented a car and did Indonesia and Borneo.
Oh, fun.
Sarawak, Kalimantan.
Oh, nice.
I mean, amazing places. Yeah.
Incredible. So you land in Durban, and tell me generally what was your route through Africa?
In Africa, we initially did Durban, went north to Kosi Bay. From Kosi Bay, we went back inland, worked our way via Kruger, all the big parks, and then
Sure.
finished up in Cape Town.
Perfect.
And from Cape Town, we did the garden route on the southern side.
Oh, so beautiful.
And then into Lesotho.
Yeah, Lesotho is such, and you went, and if I remember hearing your story, you went through Lesotho, and you're in this big truck, and you come to the edge of Sani Pass.
Correct.
Yeah, so tell me how that went.
Well, that went, my wife said, Robert, this is it. Stop, we turn around. Everyone else told me, you are not allowed to drive this truck down. Well, it was around about, I think, 8 or 10 kilometers to the bottom.
Yeah.
And basically, eight-point turns with the front of the cab hanging
Yeah.
over the edge. And of course, when the truck was on an angle, it was all very rocky. It didn't matter if we were in gear or not. The rocks would give away and the
Sure.
car would go. So the end result was I had to drive it down on my own, and Clary followed me walking.
She was taking pictures. We just got a nod from her. She's sitting on the couch here in the studio. Yeah, I drove up that pass in a very small, compact G-Wagon, and it was challenging enough in the G-Wagon. So and you went down it.
Yeah, we went
So
down.
you had all that weight trying to push you. You were going to get to the bottom one way or the other, weren't you?
Yeah, and the place, when we got to the bottom, they weren't too happy. But of course, that's where the border is with South
That's right,
Africa.
that's right.
And but our truck is 7.5. That was our first truck. Was 7.5 ton. I don't know what that is in
About 14,000 pounds.
yeah.
Yeah, so that's a heavy vehicle. The one thing about that Fuso though is they were never too long of a wheelbase, and they had a really great turning radius, and you could, because you're cab over, you can really see what you're driving over. You can have a great view of the trail.
Well, there was two things. We of course bought the short wheelbase. We
Yeah.
didn't want to have the long wheelbase. In fact, when you go over the sand hills and the rocks and
Yeah.
whatever, you don't want to hang yourself up. And yeah, you're right. I mean, you sit right above the wheels. I mean, and that's what we want from a forward driving point of view. You want to be right on top, and you
Yeah.
know where your wheels are.
Yeah, and then you can see the terrain right in front of
Exactly.
you.
Yeah.
So you were probably looking over the cliff yourself.
I was, but I didn't want to.
That's cool. That's cool. Now, and did you spend some time at the highest pub in Africa too?
Yes, absolutely. We spent 2 nights there.
And the thing that really gets people in that pub is that I think you're around 9,000 feet. So what would that be? Somewhere around 4,000 meters or something like that. Is that
3.5, yeah.
okay?
Yeah.
Right. So you're at pretty good elevation, and you have a couple cocktails or you have a few few beers and you're feeling it.
Yeah. And when you wake up in the morning, when you look down the valley, of course you'll be above the clouds, which is a real amazing thing. And the local, the nomads who live around there, of course, they come and visit. And they see the truck, they've never seen one.
Yeah.
And they want to have a good look. Yeah.
Yeah, amazing people. Because it's so cold and the weather's so bad there, they look like they look medieval. The way that they've got these hoods over their head that comes down like chainmail, and they've got these heavy blankets over them. I mean, they look like they're something right out of a movie. Incredible people.
Yeah.
Yeah, really special part of the world. All right, so you get through Lesotho, and then what was your next most favorite thing that you experienced in your trip across Africa?
I think, see, Africa for me is the number one overlanding destination.
No question. Yeah,
and I mean, the people are amazing. I can't really pick something which would be the best. All the experiences we got were very good. May that be cultural, meeting some people while they have a festival in their little village. But we try to camp as much as we can away from the big city. So we ask for permission if we can camp in a small village somewhere on the side.
Sure.
And of course, then you get invited. The wildlife. I mean, I remember we were having a barbecue, and all of a sudden, Clary turns around and said, "Robert, look behind you." And within 10 meters of us, 4 lions just walked straight past us. That was in South Luanga in Zambia.
Well, they could smell the barbecue.
Well, they did, but they were looking at us, but they kept walking. I mean, another probably amazing experience was with the chimpanzees, with the gorillas on the border with the Congo and Zambia.
Yeah.
Of course, in Rwanda. I mean, those things are amazing, and they all amazing experience. Having said all that, in Rwanda, going through the genocide history, etc., that was actually quite. Maybe for Clary even was actually depressing. On one night we were actually sitting at the river, and we're talking about 2010.
Sure.
And all of a sudden there was trouble, and 6 dead bodies just floated past.
Oh yeah.
And of course Clary said, "I think it's time to leave." And we went back to Uganda.
Yeah.
But the experiences. I mean, we went to the Mercy tribe in Ethiopia. We did Mozambique. I mean, everything in Africa is. East Coast probably slightly better than the West Coast,
as I understand. I've only done the east side. So.
Yeah. And Sudan, even places like Sudan, they were amazing. We met some. We stayed in small villages. We stayed with people. You get invited into their houses. You get offered food. Africa. I can't pick one thing which I probably, where I say, look, I didn't like it. I mean, in Ethiopia, maybe the fact they're all standing next to the road with their hand up, to the fact they have the handouts. But Africa's, for me, the number one destination. We've been there 4 years, 2 years in 2010, 2012, and 2 years in 15 and 16.
Okay, so then you drove the length of Africa. You come up into Egypt. And where did you go from there?
The first trip, we were on our way to Libya exactly when when Gaddafi trouble started. So we actually backtracked through Sudan into Saudi Arabia.
Okay.
Worked our way to the Middle East.
Through Syria?
Yeah, Syria, another amazing country. And so was Saudi Arabia for us.
Yeah.
The only thing was my steering wheel is on the right-hand side.
Oh, that's challenging.
And, of course, women in those days, I think it's changed a bit now, but in those days, women were not allowed to drive.
Yeah.
And what happened was, every roadblock we got stopped. The fact they thought Clary, my wife, was driving.
Sure.
Anyway, with all this, plus the fact that the ferry we were on from Sudan to Saudi Arabia, that ferry was delayed due to the fact there were so many illegals on board, and that they had to get them off the boat. The rest had to go to Mecca for the Hajj.
Right.
Anyway, so we were late already in Saudi. And one night we were driving towards the Jordan border. And as you know, those freeways, they got fences around them to keep the camels away.
Sure.
But I mean, in Saudi Arabia, they do 250 kilometers an hour.
They fly.
In miles, I don't know what.
Yeah, really fast. Yeah.
So all of a sudden, we saw a little hole in the fence, and I just drove my truck in there. And I could see on my GPS, which was not allowed in those days, but I could see that the Red Sea was around about 12 k's away. There was a dirt track through the sand hills, and we just set up camp. And within probably an hour, All of a sudden, I could hear all this noise, and I said to Clary, get dressed. What I mean, Clary had to completely be covered up. And it was like a Mad Max movie. All of a sudden, this big Land Cruiser with a machine gun on the back came over the sandhills. And of course, this guy looked at me and he says, I said, look, me, tourist. Anyway, we couldn't get anywhere with him, but he took my passport and he left. And 2 hours later, he came back with my passport. And of course, the message was that he had somebody with him who could speak English. And he said, tomorrow morning, you go and see the commander. We didn't ever realize we were on army terrain.
Oh, no. Oh, no.
Anyway, I didn't want to take the risk. So the next morning, very early, I took off quickly towards the border with Jordan. And I can tell you, the whole trip, I've been looking in my reverse mirror, waiting for somebody. But nothing happened. It was all good.
Yeah, good. So you went into Jordan, and then from there into Syria.
Yeah.
Now, what year was that? You went
that was actually right when the war started, 2010, 2011.
Yeah, so you had the opportunity to see Syria when it was still so incredible, before it had been destroyed.
It's, again, amazing country. We went to places like Palmyra near the Iraq border.
Sure.
We went to Aleppo, Damascus.
Right.
The funny thing is, actually, I never realized this, but while we were in Syria, and all of a sudden we take pictures everywhere. And when I got home, I realized that when I was in Damascus, there was a guy in the background. And then I was in Palmyra, the same guy in the background. Yeah. And then I was in Aleppo, and the same guy in there. They've been following us.
Yeah, sure.
We didn't know. But the people have been amazing.
Yeah.
And we really got looked after in Damascus very, very well by a local family who lived in the outskirts of Damascus. And I wonder what happened to those poor people. Due to the fact there is nothing standing there anymore. Yeah.
Yeah, it just breaks your heart because there's so much history there, and it stood for thousands of years, and then most of it destroyed in a moment. Yeah, lessons for all of us, isn't it?
Absolutely. I mean, and I always say, and I said that on the expo this weekend, I mean, if people would travel a lot more around the world would be a hell of a lot better place.
Yeah.
It's a shame a lot of people don't travel. And it's a shame that so many people are scared due to the fact you don't have to be scared, but as a tourist, you're not really a target unless you be at the wrong place at the wrong time.
Or you're doing something you're not supposed to do.
Yeah.
When you go into a bar, don't hit on somebody's girlfriend. You don't do that in your hometown. Don't do it in the middle of wherever. Don't do it in Peru. Yeah. It's like it's not gonna work out well for you.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And basically respect their culture and everything else. I mean, we are the guests.
Yes,
I mean, even though we maybe don't like it, we maybe don't agree with it, it's their country. If you don't like it,
you can leave.
Exactly.
You can go someplace else. So speaking about that, what are some other things that you and your wife have learned in your travels that you share with others, that you'd love for other people to know that are getting started with travel?
I think the best lesson is that, as I said before, you have to integrate with the local population and do what the locals do. Yeah. When in Rome, do what the Romans do.
Sure.
When in Syria, do what the Syrians do.
Right.
When in India, same story. In Cambodia, Mongolia, you do what the locals do. And if you don't like it, well, then you have to move on. But, don't argue with them due to the fact, it's a little bit like if I travel through Iran and Pakistan and we get invited in somebody's house, the first thing most people will say, what do you think of us in the West?
Yeah, sure.
And when you get into the house, even though the ladies are all covered up, but when you get into their house, they have jeans.
Yeah, sure.
They have nice shirts. And the girls look very sexy and very nice. But the minute they get outside, not. In Tibet, we had as you know, in Tibet you need a guide. You can't drive on your own. So we traveled all around Tibet and also all around China in 2 different trips. And initially we had a guy who came from Beijing. We met up with him at the border with Kyrgyzstan and we were going to cross to Tibet. He couldn't even speak the Tibetan language. And of course, he was basically not a guide. He was a spy.
Sure.
And
he was a minder,
Yeah. And he had no idea. He could not even talk to the language. So on the end of it, we got a bit annoyed with him and we got rid of him. But the problem is, when you get rid of him, you can't drive any further due to the fact the first checkpoint you'll be stopped.
Sure.
So the agency organized a new guide. This guide was living in Lhasa, And he got on our car and he was talking about everything, what happened to his family, his parents, and how the Chinese put a lot of pressure on him.
Sure.
And then all of a sudden we went into the Potala Palace and I kept asking questions, but he never said anything. When we got back in the car, he said, Robert, you ask me any question you like in the car. Do not ask me any questions on the street or in the building.
Right.
You know, there is a lot of things happening in Tibet. A lot of Chinese moving in.
Sure.
A lot of things happening there, which that's what we learned. That all of a sudden, you know, even the Chinese people we see around the world, they are either part of the Communist Party, but the majority of the people have no passport and not allowed to leave their country.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, challenging for
Very.
so many people around the world.
Yeah.
So now you've gone from Africa, you've gone through the Middle East, and now you're back in the West. So you're back in Europe. Did you drive home?
No, we did park our car in the Netherlands, of course. At that stage, my mum and dad were still alive. Clary's mum and dad were still alive. But from there, of course, we went east, Ukraine, Russia,
Sure.
and worked our way all the way down to Singapore.
What did your family? How was it? Because you had been, by this point in time, you had been gone for over 20 years.
Yeah.
And you're now coming home. How was it, you know, trying to reconnect with your friends and your family? How did that go?
Well, that went quite well. I mean, but it is amazing what changes if you haven't been there for a long time. I got lost in my own country. I didn't,
Sure.
you know, what happened here, what happened there. So,
Sure.
But we were lucky that we met my parents flew to Australia in between. Clary's
Sure.
parents have been to Australia. So, but my long-term friends, the people I used to work with in the bars and the
Yeah,
nightclubs, they were all there, and it was like, Robert, it's like you never left.
Yeah,
you know?
sure.
Yeah.
It's interesting how, like you said, travel changes us so much that oftentimes we can change so much that we can't relate to like the friends of our childhood or sometimes even to our own family. So it can be difficult to be gone for that long like you guys were and then try to reintegrate a little bit.
I think the biggest thing is that we had so many experiences in that time frame. When you get invited in somebody's house and you're going to tell them in 10 minutes what you did, they look at you, they think, hang on.
Yeah.
How old are you? 200? You know?
Yeah.
So that is the hardest part. You have to be very careful. After you've been traveling so long, don't tell them everything in 5 or 10 minutes.
Yeah.
The fact that it just goes, they don't believe the stories.
They can't process it. Exactly. Yeah. You know, it's interesting the vehicles that have come out of those kinds of situations. Like the G-Wagon was all paid for, the engineering and everything else like that, by the Shah of Iran. And then he gets deposed, and now Mercedes has all this IP, all these assets, and then they just started making the car for themselves because they didn't have a customer any longer.
Well, I couldn't believe it. Colonel Gaddafi was the biggest Mercedes-Benz dealer in Northern Africa.
Amazing.
And even when we traveled as far south as Mali and Nigeria, all the big 5-star hotels where all our presidents and everyone else stayed, they were all owned by Gaddafi.
Oh, wow.
So on the one hand, we boycott him. On the other hand, we spent money with him. So, yeah.
That's how the world goes round. Huh?
Exactly, yeah.
So you go across Russia, and did you go to Vladivostok or did you go to Magadan?
No, we didn't go to Magadan for the simple reason I would have loved. It's still on my bucket list.
Sure.
Magadan I want to do in the winter.
Yeah.
And the time we arrived at Lake Baikal, the winter was nearly over. It started to warm up. And we wanted to go to the Nadam Festival in Mongolia due to the fact that it's just an ancient, call it an Olympic Games type setup.
It's incredible.
And we wanted to see that. So we basically, instead of going north to Madigan, to follow the Madigan line, we went to Mongolia. Yeah, but otherwise we had to come all the way back unless we wanted to ship to Japan, which we didn't do. Yeah.
Now, how was it going through the Gobi? That's something that's really interesting to me. When I did Mongolia, it was the northern route. I took the northern route across because it was the less traveled route. So I never made it into the Gobi. How was that?
The Gobi, actually for me, the Gobi was nice, but quite touristy.
Ah, interesting.
But we did the same thing. When we crossed into Mongolia from Russia, we did the northern route all the way to basically to the western part of Mongolia, and then went back through the middle.
Oh, okay, got it.
And when we got back to the middle, we finished up in Ulaanbaatar, of course.
Sure.
And then we took the dirt tracks to China. And that was very interesting. When you're driving, and you either come over, we had bad weather, we had a lot of rain there, so there was mud, and then all of a sudden you're standing on top of a hill, there are no signs, and you see tracks going left, right, left, which one do we take? And of course, when you ask somebody, they just say, go straight ahead.
Yeah.
And so we did the Gobi Desert I think we did it in a week or 10 days out of Ulaanbaatar.
Okay.
And we just followed the touristy tracks. But
Sure.
the most interesting part was that road all the way to the Chinese border. Well, not road. You just drive over grass.
That's right.
That's all you do.
Yeah, it's like a gigantic lawn.
Yeah.
It is. It's amazing. It goes off in every direction.
A mix of mud and sand.
And every once in a while, you'll see there'll be a bridge over a big river, or there'll be a couple gers with some families, and that's about it. There's just not much out there.
Nothing. I mean, we actually, it took us 2.5 days. We got lost due to the fact the GPS told us roughly where we had to go. But the problem was you had to make left and right hand turn.
Yeah.
Well, the GPS tells you to go straight ahead, but you couldn't. So you had to go around, you had to come back and find your way around.
Sure.
It. Yeah.
Which is all part of the fun, isn't it?
Exactly. And we travel on our own. A lot of people say, oh, you should have gone in convoy, but we're on our own. We like it. We have a satellite phone.
Yeah.
So if something
you need
goes,
it. Yeah. Well, speaking of that, in your decades now of travel, have you ever had to get that kind of help where you had to get on the sat phone and the vehicle was really broken? Have you ever had that come up?
Never. I mean, we never. I mean, I service my car. I'm completely atechnical.
Yeah.
I can check what the oil looks like, and that's about it.
Yeah.
I service my car every 50,000 kilometers. We've had breakdowns like everyone else. I mean, we've done all up, I think, around about 400,000 miles, But I service it, and I had a diff gone once. That was a warranty thing. I had 2 flat tires. That's all we had. But for the rest, no, but service. I service it all the time. If I hear a rattle, I go to the garage. Yeah.
So you do the trip through Southeast Asia, and that was the last of the journey in the Fuso. And where did you buy this Mercedes truck? Where did you get that from?
The Mercedes truck came for sale in Libya. Finished up the Germans took all the cars away due to the fact Gaddafi hadn't paid for those ones sitting in the showroom. And we bought it in Germany. The problem with the car was, of course, it still had the machine gun on it, the infrared, that we could never get it registered. So it had to be re-registered, so all that had to be taken off. The only thing we never took off was the bomb-proof steel plate on the rear of the cab chassis, and we built actually our unit on top of it.
Oh, that's interesting. Now you built this. You had this unit built. Your camper, conversion. You had that built. Where did you have that built?
Built in the Netherlands.
Okay.
It was my design. Again, same as the previous, except we made it slightly bigger, but we wanted to have a motorbike in it.
Oh, nice. Okay.
So we have a motorbike separate, comes in and out on a crane, and so that meant that we had to make the unit 1 meter or 3 feet in unit longer. Yeah.
And what kind of a motorbike do you have in the back?
A Suzuki 150. Okay. Actually, I don't know if you guys call it a motorbike. We call it a scooter, but it's 150 cc.
Perfect.
It's only for sightseeing, shopping.
Yeah, sure.
And
so you don't have to drive the truck around.
Well, if you're in small places like Nepal and India, Bhutan, all those places, there were very narrow streets, and the historic centers are small. Kathmandu we got stuck between 2 walls in Kathmandu. We've taken some power lines down and those type of things. So basically, that's when the scooter is the way to go.
It's your scout vehicle.
Yes.
You can go check out the road ahead.
But Clary will tell me very quickly, I call her the handbrake.
Well, it's because she knows what's best for you. Awesome. So speaking of that, what are some lessons that you guys have traveling together? What are some things that you found help to make you guys successful as a couple traveling around the world?
Yeah, it's hard to say. We've always worked together. So for us, we've always been together a long time, except my time in the Marines. I was away, of course. But, I mean, since we basically migrated to Australia, we've always been together. I don't know what... I hear some people have got all kind of trouble and issues. I don't think we have that. I mean, I'm responsible for the car, where we're going.
Yeah.
Clary does the cooking, but I mean, I couldn't boil an egg, So Clary does the cooking, and I think, that is about it. Now, having said that, of course, if it gets a bit rough, then Clary will say, Robert, this will do me, turn around, or we park here, we never have any issues really.
Yeah.
I mean, we call it domestics in Australia, where every now and then. I'll give you an example. We were in India, and as you know, in India, traffic is horrendous. A 2-lane road becomes 4 lanes, and if possible, they will also take the footpath. So we were on one of those roads, and all of a sudden, and the traffic lights, of course, it doesn't matter if it's green, orange, or red.
Yeah,
I mean, it is just there for the color. I mean, no one cares.
Yeah.
And a guy on a motorbike, crossed the road, got driven over, and was dead. And he was laying 10 meters in front of my truck, but there was only one car in front of it. And I wanted Clary to put that on video.
Yeah.
And Clary, of course, didn't want to do this. And that's when we had a bit of a domestic. Due to the fact, I said, hey, how do I explain this to somebody in Australia? Because and then matters got worse. Well, what happened was everyone's beeping the horn, and all of a sudden somebody jumps out of the car, picks up the dead body, throws it on the footpath, and everyone starts driving. And I would have liked to have that on my video, but Clary was absolutely against it.
Sure.
And that's when we have every now and then a few words.
But that makes sense because everybody has a different experience or a different expectation.
Yeah.
So as a couple, trying to find a way to get common ground, I guess.
Yeah, exactly, and that's it. Yeah, and I mean the other thing is I don't think we touch on the corruption bit.
Yeah.
That is also sometimes. Yeah, if somebody is really going to give you a hard time, I mean, I give him a bit of a hard time back, and then Clary says, Robert, take it easy. I mean, we had some really nice stories I could tell you about places in Zimbabwe and whatever, where all of a sudden we made the fun out of it and they just let us go.
Sure. Yeah. No, and I think just a smile and some respect, and what I like to do is just tell them how beautiful their country is. And it's true, because that's why I'm there. I want to see Malawi or wherever. So I think complimenting their country, telling them how grateful you are to be there, I think it makes them a little more conscious of the fact that they are being corrupt in the way that they're treating me as a guest.
Yeah.
So usually it makes it a little bit easier in my experience.
When we were in Zimbabwe, I may as well tell the story. That would have been 2009, 2010. And Mugabe was still in charge.
Sure.
And of course, we met up with some other people who we met in Mozambique before, as in people who lived there. And all of a sudden, we're just reading in the paper that Mugabe was happy for the police and everyone else to get a bribe on the road. Due to the fact that means he didn't have to pay him much money. And you wouldn't believe it, within a day, we're just outside Harare, I got stopped. Sir, criminal offense. And of course, in Zimbabwe, they speak broken English. Sir, criminal offense. You're driving too fast. And I just looked out of the window. My truck is high. I looked down at him and I said, I got the map of the world next to me on the door. I said, I come all the way from Australia, over the ocean. No, sir. You driving too fast. I said, we arrived in South Africa. We went all the way around South Africa. Sir, you, criminal offense. Then we came to your beautiful country, Zimbabwe. We like Mugabe. Sir, you driving too fast. From Mugabe, from Zimbabwe, we're going to Malawi. And then he put his hands up in the air and says, go.
Yeah, no, and that can be helpful for sure.
And I mean, on the end of it, he laughed. When he let me go, he laughed. So obviously, you have to play the game. I got stopped. Actually, probably the nastiest thing we ever had, when I say nasty, it wasn't as bad, but we came from Ethiopia into Sudan. And obviously Sudan is boycotted, and there is no Sudanese pants. You can't buy them anywhere except on the black market. So when we got to the border between Ethiopia and Sudan, I asked what we normally do. Hey, listen, any good deals on money?
Yeah.
You want to shop around, and don't use the bank, but they're too expensive. And the guy said, yeah, I know somebody, that guy over there. Okay, thank you. So we walked up with $200, wanted to change it for Sudanese pound. As we were doing the transaction, I just got grabbed from behind. You arrested for illegal money trading. And they took me to the police station and locked me up. Anyway, after 20 or 30 minutes, they were trying to give me a hard time, and there was a guy sitting in the far corner, and he never said much. And all of a sudden, the arresting officer, which we were waiting for, arrived. Guess what? That was the bloke who told me who to use. He just wanted money. And at that same time, Clary walked in, but after an hour, Clary had enough, but she was told to wait in the car. And he was sitting there with the money in front of him, and Clary just grabbed the money, and all he said was, "You want to be arrested too?" And at the same time, it sounded like a movie, but at the same time, a couple of the locals started fighting with each other within the police station, and they let us go. Matter done.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that are the things, that's the worst. If I think of something, what would be the worst in 20 years of travel, what we've been on the road 20 years, I mean, that would probably be the worst thing I can think of. Yeah.
Amazing. Well, you know, that's the common story, is that people have wonderful experiences.
Exactly.
You know, there certainly can be things that go wrong, but I think just being a little bit mindful, you're usually okay.
Yeah.
So I'm really curious, pivoting the conversation a little bit towards the big truck. What have you found helps you make good decisions around driving such a large vehicle? What are some rules that you have, or how do you address small villages? How do you deal with the power lines? How do you when you come across a bridge that says it's a 3-ton bridge or a 3.5-ton bridge, and you got a 10-ton truck? How are some ways that you deal with that?
Well, actually, let's start with the last one, but that's quite funny. We were in Uzbekistan, and of course, we've been driving a dirt track, which is the fact that was the scenic route. And after probably 300 kilometers, all of a sudden, we got to a bridge. And that bridge said 3.5 ton. And I'm 12.
Mm-hmm.
So then Clary walked over the bridge. And of course, the plates were all loose. And it was 30 meters. Or maybe 40, I don't know. And I said to Clary, look, walk to the other side, foot down, and up we went. And it went okay.
Yeah.
I mean, we have had many in those type of countries. I mean, some of them don't tell you what the weight is.
Yeah, that's right.
You know, but if that particular one had told us, but the option was nearly 1,000 kilometer trip around.
Detour, sure.
Yeah, and we didn't want to do that. So I went around. In the smaller villages, particularly in Pakistan and India, those type of places, you have a lot of low-lying power lines.
Yes.
And we've hit a few in our time. In fact, I hit a real big one in Pokhara in Nepal, where basically the whole village was out of power.
Oh, no.
And, of course, it broke, and I got a huge burning mark on my roof. And then a guy came up, he said, you better move, and if the locals will be here soon, and you'll be paying. And he helped me. We had to get those cables off the car.
Yeah, sure.
And the cables fell in between the cab and the living unit.
Oh, that's terrifying.
But within 10 minutes, 3 guys on motorbikes with guns right behind me. And of course, you pay. And I had to stop. I jumped out of the car, told them I was going to park on the end and it was another 10 or 15 kilometers away. And I told them, look, come and see me over there. I said, but there is nothing I can do now. And they left.
Yeah.
And when I parked there, I said to the local guy, I said, hey, the police will be turning up shortly due to the fact I hit power lines there. He said, well, Robert, those power lines, they are too low anyway. And the police won't turn up due to the fact they haven't got the money for the fuel to come here.
Mm.
And we never heard anything back. But the following day, when we drove back, we're on the motorbike, and all of a sudden you could see those guys putting the cables back together. And we just said, let's look to the left as we drove past. So, yeah, I mean, the other thing, what's lucky, in my car, I got one of those machine gun holes, but the hole is still there.
Yeah.
So Clary will stand in the middle, and if we do go over low power lines, we use a stick and just lift them.
Yeah, one of the things that we used with an earth roamer that we had going through Central America was we had a long section of PVC pipe.
Yep.
Just the white PVC pipe, and I cut a little V notch in the end of it, and we could, because it's insulated, because it's plastic, you could lift the power lines up a little bit to.
We use the broom handle.
The broom handle would work too.
Yeah. And I got my aerial, and of course I got a framework above, so I know I can see if the power lines start moving. And the only problem I got is that if I drive slow, it will fall between the cab and the living part. So that's what I have to avoid. Yeah.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah. And how do you deal with, one of the challenges with the bigger truck as well is it's surprising how much more money you can spend on road tolls, on shipping. Are there ways that you found to get around that?
Yeah, well, I mean, obviously we don't like the toll roads. If we don't have to, we won't.
Yeah.
I mean, we'll take the normal roads, and I mean, if they get really bad or the road stops sometimes, all of a sudden there is nothing. I mean, we've been driving through West Africa, and all of a sudden there was no road. And basically, we were driving in a different country. We went from Togo into Benin without even knowing. We're just driving in between the houses.
Yeah, sure.
You know, so that is not a problem. From shipping point of view, I mean, if you really plan your trip smart, you only have to ship once. And then the second time to get back home. But if we look at, let's say, for instance, we're in the US here. So if I would live here, I would drive my car all the way from here to, well, you can Alaska all the way down to Ushuaia. Obviously, you need the ferry, but Darien Gap is not happening. So you take the ferry to Cartagena. Then you can do the whole of South America. You have already done the whole of Central America. You've done already Alaska and Canada. Then you do the whole of South America, including the Amazon, which I think is an amazing overland destination. And then you can ship out of either Brazil or you ship out of Buenos Aires to Europe.
Yeah.
Once you get to Europe, you can do the whole of Europe. You can do the whole, and then you take the ferry from Spain to Africa, 20 minutes.
Yeah.
You drive all the way down the west coast or zigzag, come back up the east coast. You take the ferry out of Sudan to Saudi Arabia. You cross the whole of the Middle East. You can go into Russia, China, Tibet, work your way all the way to Southeast Asia, ship from Malaysia or Singapore into Indonesia. You do all the islands of Indonesia, and it's very sophisticated. There's ferry systems everywhere.
Sure.
Finish up in an island called Dili, which is just off the coast of Australia. Take the ferry to Darwin in northern Australia. You do the whole of Australia, and then you ship back home.
Yeah, so you don't really have a lot of shipping. Yeah.
No.
And that's essentially what you guys did in the Fuso?
That's what we do, yeah.
Amazing. So tell me, if you were to give some advice to your younger self, let's say you were to go back 20 years and give yourself some advice, what would you tell yourself about what you've learned after 20 years on the road?
It's a hard question.
Yeah.
But I mean, really, it all went so smooth for us.
Yeah.
We didn't have any issues.
Yeah.
And I mean, all I can say to the younger generation is sometimes the way I see it, and I'm getting old here now, so but I'm saying, look, guys, instead of start traveling early, and I would basically make sure I had enough money in the kitty before I start traveling. That's probably the advice I could give. I mean, we worked all our lives, and we semi-retired when we were 50, and basically we had enough money to do what we do now.
Yeah.
I wouldn't do anything any different. I mean, for us, and I mean, some people say you're lucky. I think it's always the same people who seem to have the same issues. And I mean, I think
some people are lucky a lot, and some people are unlucky a lot.
Well, I don't know if they make themselves unlucky.
I think so.
But yeah, I don't think I would do anything different. I mean, if anything, I would probably go to Australia 4 years earlier. I mean, but
sure.
that is a long way back. Yeah. I mean, and it wasn't easy. We had to work hard. We had to work 18-hour days. When we had our own business, we worked 7 days a week.
Yeah.
We had no holidays. We had no nothing. We saved and saved and saved.
Yeah.
The other thing we don't do while we travel around the world is we don't go out for dinner much. We don't spend a lot. We eat at the truck. You know, we don't eat, and of course, especially here in the US. I mean, this is an expensive country for us.
Sure.
But our Australian dollar is worth nothing, so everything is nearly double. So I would say that's where, you know, that's the type of advice I would say. But I mean, we've always done that. We've really always worked on a budget.
You've been
we have a budget.
frugal, yeah.
Yeah.
You've been frugal. So now that you've made it to the United States, what's next? Where are you guys heading after this?
Well, we really need to spend another 2 years in the US. We've only done the West Coast. So we came in last year, June. We traveled all the way along the coast north to Washington, went inland to South Dakota, came back Nebraska, northern Colorado, western Colorado, worked our way through Utah, I mean, you guys live in an amazing country. I mean, it's probably one of the best in the world. You know, it was South Africa, probably national parks. And I mean, but here, it's been, for us, been an amazing trip. We left our truck in Phoenix. But we travel between the 6 and 9 months of the year. And then we go home between the 6 and 3 months of the year.
Sure.
We left our truck in Phoenix in November last year. We came back in March. We've just done Route 66 till St. Louis.
Yeah.
And then worked our way back to southwestern Colorado due to the fact we missed that on the last trip. And of course then we came back for the Overland Expo. And we're now going for a couple of weeks into Mexico, a little bit of laziness and find a nice spot somewhere in the Baja.
It's not hard to do, yeah. Eat lots of tacos.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then we come back and we're going to do Texas. We're going to do that whole the southern and the southwest of Texas.
Yeah.
Work our way to New Orleans, Memphis, Nashville, and then Key West, towards Key West, Florida. Leave our truck there somewhere and go home. Come back, and then we're going to do the east coast of the US, and then the next step will be Canada.
Yeah.
And we're probably planning 2 years. We never plan much ahead. You know, let's say 2 years Canada, maybe 3, finish up in Alaska. And by that time, we've done 144 countries.
Amazing.
And then we're done. We're probably going to do another trip around Australia.
Yeah. Oh, how wonderful. You know, you guys are a true inspiration to so many. You guys have done amazing journeys around the world. It's been a pleasure to communicate with you through the years. You and I have communicated back and forth, but we didn't really have a chance to meet, and we got to meet just recently at the Overland Expo. And this is such a rare opportunity to sit down with someone with your experience and learn about your life. So how do people follow your journey? How do they find out more about you?
We have a Facebook site and we have a website. And the website is doubledutchworldsafari.com.
Okay.
Or .com.au, either way. And our Facebook site is just under Robert van der Hoven. But none of it is commercial.
Sure.
So basically, sometimes I'm a little bit behind. But after things like meeting people always send me questions and I answer them. What I mean, for us, it's a hobby. There is no, I mean, you know, we give all the advice we can. And having said all that, I would also say to those people planning to do a big trip, make sure that when you talk to somebody on Facebook or on any other media platform, that there are people in the know.
Yeah, sure.
But I can give you advice over my crossing from, let's say, from Rwanda to the Congo, but that was 10 years ago. I mean, things change sometimes daily.
That's
so
right.
listen to those who are traveling there right now.
Yeah, you definitely don't want to get advice from someone who's never been there, because they're going to tell you not to go because they're afraid.
Or they tell you they heard it from a friend.
Yeah, and that's right. It's just nothing you can take action on.
Exactly.
Yeah, you're much better getting the information from the person that just came from the other direction just that day, and then you can get some really good details on the ground. So, Robert, thank you so much for being on the podcast with us. We appreciate it. It's fun to have you here in Prescott, and we appreciate what you do.
No worries. Thank you very much, Scott. And you also, you also do a real good job.
Thank you.
And get people traveling around the world. I mean, it's a little bit like my mentor was Ron Moon in Australia. He's the one who made me do what we do now.
Yes.
And I think you're one of those people who will actually make people start traveling around the world and leave the US for later.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, that's my thought. I'll when I'm retired, I'll drive around the U.S.
That's what we're going to do in Europe and in Australia. Yes,
that's perfect. Wonderful. Thank you, Robert.
No problem. Thank you.
And we thank you all for listening, and we'll talk to you next time.